Episode 12, and the spine has moved to govern. 11 episodes have described things people build. These last 2 are about how anybody outside the building knows whether it worked. This one is about benchmarks, and it has an unusual constraint that I want to declare in the first minute rather than have you notice halfway through. It does not contain a single leaderboard figure. That is deliberate. It costs the episode something, and slide 3 explains the rule and why I think the rule is right. Every earlier episode ended with a claim about what some design achieves, and a claim is only ever as good as the instrument that could have contradicted it in the first place. 3 sentences you will have read. It remembers better than what, at what horizon, on which capability. Without those 3 the sentence has no content that could be false. It improves over time, over which time, inside a session, across sessions, or across a training run. Those are 3 different claims needing 3 different instruments. And it beats the baseline. Which baseline? Because if the baseline had no memory and a long context window, then slide 19 says you may not have measured memory at all. Each is missing a different control, and none of them is a lie. They are sentences that cannot be checked. So here is the rule. No leaderboard figures, not one. What does go on screen is a suite's composition. How many questions, over what horizon, which task families, which capabilities it scores. Those are durable properties. What does not go on screen is any system score on any suite, no method and number pairing, no improvement percentage. And the distinction is not a compromise, it is this episode's first claim about reporting. A suite's composition is still true in 3 years. A score on it is superseded by the next release. Numbers belong in a repository table where somebody can update them. 3 objectives. List the 6 capabilities a suite must separate, and name what most report instead, which is usually one aggregate. Choose the right suite for a given claim, in that order, because picking the suite first is how you end up with a claim that fits the suite. And report a memory result so that somebody else can reproduce and falsify it. That last verb is the one that matters. A result nobody can falsify is not a contribution, and the reporting table near the end of this episode exists to make falsification cheap. One thing I will not do is rank the suites against each other. They measure different capabilities at different horizons, so a ranking would be a category error. 6 capabilities, and the claim is that a suite has to separate them rather than average them. Retention, is it still there at all? Retrieval accuracy, is the right item returned for the query? Update and overwrite, does a later write correctly supersede an earlier one? Contradiction handling, when 2 stored items disagree, which one wins and why? Abstention when unknown, does it decline rather than guess? And cost, what the answer took. Horizon length is not a 7th capability, it is the independent variable, and it is the thing most suites quietly fix. What earns the 6th their place is that each can fail while the other 5 hold, which is the test any decomposition has to pass. Here is why separation is the whole argument. 6 dials, each at its own setting, that is what a memory system actually is. Now watch them collapse into a single aggregate. And now watch 2 more configurations, visibly different from the first, produce the identical aggregate number. The collapse is not recoverable, from the one number you cannot get back to the 6 settings, and there is no clever inversion that recovers them. Which is why an aggregate cannot tell you what to fix. It cannot even tell you what you have. If two systems report one aggregate each, no amount of statistical care on those two numbers recovers what differs between them. So here are the three lists against each other. Retention maps to long-range understanding. Retrieval accuracy maps cleanly to both. Update and overwrite is our 41's test time learning. And one naming not to untie once, our contradiction handling is our 41 selective forgetting, whose task family is called fact consolidation, and our 54 cited that same dimension under its earlier name, conflict resolution, when explaining why it excluded it. 3 names, 1 dimension. Then read the last row, because it is the one that should bother you. Neither suite scores cost, and every practitioner watching needs it. And Horizon deserves its own slide because it is usually invisible. A capability measured at 1 horizon is a different measurement at 10 times that horizon. Retrieval accuracy over 10 turns is a search problem, over 10,000 turns it is an indexing problem, and the same number means something else entirely. So a suite that fixes horizon has fixed part of the answer before you arrive, and most suites fix it without saying so anywhere prominent. Which makes horizon the first thing to look up about a suite, and the first thing to state about a result you are reporting. Ask the horizon before you ask the score, because the horizon determines which capability the number could possibly be about. The first long horizon suite scores 5 capabilities, one of which is abstention, over 500 questions. And its framework is explicitly 3-stage, indexing, retrieval, reading. 2 observations. Abstention being scored at all is the notable inclusion, because most suites reward answering and say nothing about declining, which means most suites cannot distinguish a confident wrong answer from a refusal. And note that 500 questions is a composition figure rather than a score, which is exactly why it is allowed on screen under slide 3's rule. The stage structure tells you what a suite can distinguish, and a suite with 1 stage reports 1 kind of failure. Which gives the most useful thing in that framework. A failure at reading is not a failure at retrieval, and a single accuracy number cannot tell you which you have. Indexing failed means the item was never findable, whatever the query. Retrieval failed means it was findable and the query did not find it. Reading failed means it was retrieved, placed in context, and then misused. 3 fixes, 3 teams, 3 costs, and 1 aggregate score that points at none of them. That is slide 6 argument again, arriving from a published framework rather than from me. The 3 failure sites have almost nothing in common, a schema problem, a ranking problem, and a prompting problem. The second long horizon suite is the scale 1, 451 questions, up to 500 trajectories, 115 million tokens. And 1 correction that has to travel with it, it is text, not multimodal. The scale is real, the multimodal description that circulates is not. Our own series plan repeated that error, which is how I know it is easy to repeat. Episode 5 made the same correction on the same suite, and 2 episodes stating it identically is the cheapest available defense against a mistake that spreads by citation rather than by evidence. An error in a description propagates faster than a correction, because the description is what gets copied forward. Which raises the question of what scale actually buys, and the answer is specific. A fact cannot be observed to expire inside a short benchmark, because nothing in it has had time to expire. So staleness is not a hard capability to measure, it is a capability that is invisible below some horizon, and every suite shorter than that horizon reports its absence as a pass. The same holds for contradiction handling. 2 items can only disagree if they were written far enough apart for the world to have changed between them. The two capabilities this series worked hardest on are the two a short suite structurally cannot see. Episodes 5 and 9 were about capabilities most evaluations cannot see, and not because they are careless. The third setting moves the unit of evaluation to the session. Interdependent multi-session agentic tasks, where a later session's task depends on what an earlier one did. And the reason that matters is mechanical. At a session boundary the store is the only channel between two runs. The context window, the scratchpad, the conversation, all gone. So a multi-session task measures the store directly, in a way a single session task cannot, because within one session a good long context can substitute for memory entirely. And interdependent is the load-bearing word. Independent sessions in sequence are just the same test repeated. To find out whether your store earns its keep you need two sessions and a task in the second that depends on the first. And that setting produced a warning worth carrying. Agents that look near saturated on one suite do badly once the setting is agentic and multi-session. Read what that says about the first suite rather than about the agents. Saturation was a property of the suite. A saturated benchmark has stopped discriminating, which means it has stopped measuring and started agreeing. Episode 8 made exactly this point about archives after benchmark saturation. And the practical consequence is uncomfortable. A near ceiling score is a reason to change suite, not a reason to publish. The fix is not better methods. It is a willingness to move to a harder suite and publish a lower number. The fourth suite scores 4 competencies. Accurate retrieval, the right item for the query. Test time learning, does behavior change after a write? Long-range understanding, does the item survive distance? And selective forgetting, is old information correctly displaced? And the reported finding is that no method holds all 4. Which is the same shape as Episode 3's finding about architectures and Episode 6 about the grid, a field of narrow interventions, now described by benchmarks broad enough to notice that they are narrow. That is progress, and it reads as bad news. It also means methods and benchmarks are now roughly matched in breadth, which is new. Here are the 4 placed on 2 axes, horizon length, and the capabilities each actually scores. Watch where they cluster, and more usefully, watch where nothing sits. One empty region is short horizon suites that score update and contradiction handling, and slide 12 already explained why it is empty. Those capabilities are invisible at short horizons. The other empty region is anywhere at all that scores cost. Note that there is not a single number on this map. The positions are structural, and that is the only kind of position that will still be right next year. Cost is the capability everyone needs, nobody scores, and which is cheapest to measure. It is a counter. And 2 of those 4 deserve their own slide, because they measure something almost nothing else does. Test time learning, write something, then ask whether behavior changed. That is the only direct measurement of the right path anywhere in this episode. Selective forgetting, write something that supersedes an earlier item, then ask whether the earlier one stopped being used. Its task family is called fact consolidation. Episode 2 found that update and forget were the operations nobody owned. These 2 competencies are the only places anybody scores them, which makes this suite more important than its citation count suggests. A paper scoring retrieval tells you about the read path, these 2 tell you about the write path. And here is the design problem that makes update path benchmarks genuinely hard. A fact is written and scored correct. Then the fact is superseded, mid-evaluation. The same answer is now wrong, and the agent has not changed at all. So what is being scored, the agent, or the moment you happen to ask. Watch the target move under a marker that never moves. There are only two honest ways out: freeze the ground truth and lose the thing you wanted to measure, or version the ground truth and score against the version that held at answer time. The second is what Episode 5's clocks were for. Episode 5's clocks looked like bookkeeping, and are now a security, defense and benchmark precondition. Now the cheapest and most neglected control in the field. A survey of 15 memory methods, organized on two axes, the scope of what is remembered and the content of it, reports that long context baselines remain competitive across the methods it covers. And that yields a reporting rule, which is ours rather than the survey's. A suite without a no-memory long context baseline may not be measuring memory at all. Here is the experiment. Delete the store, keep the context window, rerun. If the score barely moves, your suite was measuring context length the whole time. The competitiveness claim will date, the reporting rule drawn from it will not, because it is about controls. One more critique, and it is the structural one. Scoring only the output cannot tell you which internal operation produced the gain. So it cannot tell you what to fix, what to keep, or what to remove, which are the three questions an engineer actually has. It also means two systems with identical scores can be identical in no other respect, and the score gives you no way to notice. The critique is not that output scoring is wrong, it is that output scoring alone is not diagnostic, and diagnosis is what a benchmark is for. Which is the argument for the six-way separation and for the reporting table. 11 episodes described mechanisms that a black box evaluation could not have told apart. Which brings the promise this episode owes. Episode 5 ended on a gap and named this episode as the place it would be taken up. Both long horizon suites score whether the right item was retrieved and whether the answer built on it was right, and they do that well. None of them scores whether the agent knew its answer had expired. Abstention is scored as a capability, can you decline, but being right about your own staleness is a different thing from being willing to decline. And Episode 9's third failure card had no metric beside it for exactly the same reason. And it is a hole in the instruments rather than the systems, which is what makes it fixable here. So what would a task have to do? 3 parts. Set up, a fact with a known validity interval, written at a known time, with the interval recorded and not shown to the agent. Query, ask after expiry, so the correct current answer differs from the stored one and the agent has not been told. And score with 3 outcomes rather than 2, answering with the stale value is wrong, answering with a flag is partial, and abstaining with a statement of what is needed is correct. That third rule is the part no suite implements, and it is a one-line change to a rubric rather than a new benchmark. A sketch rather than a suite, and small enough to bolt onto an existing one. Which lets me put a frame around the whole series. Any memory claim sits at one point in 3 dimensions. Representation, what is stored and in what form. Control, who decides what enters and what leaves. And evaluation, how anybody outside the system knows it worked. Most papers report the first 2 carefully and leave the third implicit. And I should be honest that this series has spent 11 episodes on the first 2, which is exactly why the last 2 are about the third, and why this episode had to be about instruments rather than about systems. The frame is also a reading tool, place a paper on all 3 axes before deciding whether you believe it. So here is the deliverable, 5 rows, and not one of them is a score. Store size, items held at the end of the run, which tells a reader whether the gain came from memory or from volume. Write count, attempted and admitted, because the ratio is the gate's rejection rate from episode 9. Token cost per task including retrieval overhead, which is the quantity episode 7's cost model turns on. Retrieval calls per task and items per call, which distinguishes a better index from a bigger budget. And human audit rate, the fraction of items a person actually looked at, which is the only governance number in the table. No accuracy, no success rate, no score, those belong to the suite you ran, not the run you are reporting. And why those 5? Each is a quantity a reader needs in order to falsify the claim, and each is cheap to instrument, where cheap matters more than it sounds, because a reporting standard that costs a week of engineering does not get adopted, and an unadopted standard measures nothing at all. All 5 are counters, none requires a judgment, a rubric or a second model, so none can be gamed by choosing a favorable evaluator. And all 5 are properties of your own run rather than of a leaderboard, which is why they do not go stale, and why they are the numbers this episode is willing to put on a slide. If you adopt one thing from these 13 episodes, make it this table rather than any architecture. And an artifact checklist, in 4 categories, mirroring what journals now ask for. Data, the task set, the horizon, and whether any of it was generated by the system under test, which is a question that would embarrass a surprising number of results. Code, the harness, the retrieval configuration, and the version of every model called. Configuration, prompts, thresholds, top K values, and the right policy in force. And the 4th, which this field omits, the store itself, either its final state or a documented reason it cannot be released. Releasing a store is often genuinely impossible, which is why the checklist asks for a documented reason rather than the artifact. Lab 12, and it is 3 steps. Produce the 5-row reporting table for one of your own agents, all 5 are counters you can add in an afternoon. Put Lab 5's expiry count in it, the number of items that were already expired when served, because episode 5 asked you to bring it here. Then delete the store, keep the context window, rerun, and report that row 2. 5 takeaways. 6 capabilities separated, since an aggregate collapses them for good. Horizon is the independent variable. 2 competencies in one suite are the only scored measurements of the update path anywhere. No long context baseline means you may not have measured memory. And 5 counters with no scores is a result somebody else can falsify.